Greenpoint is really close to Williamsburg, and for the last probably decade, I would say Williamsburg has been sort of the epicenter of Brooklyn culture, especially for music and art and stuff like that. That has sort of reasonably recently started to change. It's becoming very gentrified. And so people have been sort of moving into Greenpoint, which is a traditionally Polish neighborhood, or into Bushwick, which is sort of a little bit more industrial. So both Greenpoint and Bushwick have a lot of artists. We have increasingly venues that are sort of sub 200 rooms, so they're great for me to play in. A lot of the labels are here, like Sacred Bones, Captured Tracks, Mexican Summer, Cassine, they're all here. So what I like about it is it's very residential. I can play tennis, I can walk my dog. My wife and I have a really nice life here. But I'm also super close to clubs when I want to go out. And yeah, that's been a huge difference in my life living in New York and in Brooklyn. In Germany, I grew up in a small village. There wasn't a lot going on. In Chicago, when I studied there was a lot going on, but I didn't do that much. And then I lived in New Zealand for 5 years, and actually there was a lot of DIY stuff going on, but you really did have to hunt it down. And so, yeah, living in New York has been amazing and inspiring because you meet so many young kids who are going so much harder than you ever have in your life, kind of thing. And you realize that really it's just a decision. And yeah, people are doing amazing things. So I love it here. I'm as happy here as I've ever been anywhere. I definitely think my music is dramatic, and it's deliberately also emotional. But I wouldn't characterize it as melodramatic in the sense of being overly emotional, because I always say, and really stand by that, I don't write fiction. It's just my life. I have felt the ways that I express in the songs many nights, and to me it's very truthful. So it's not exaggerated, it's just simply honest. Now, but definitely the emotional quality to me is very important. I grew up listening to bands that I feel like put a lot of energy into their music, and it was emotional. Now, whether that was punk rock or goth music in Germany. And if you think of bands like Skinny Puppy, they're very theatrical bands, but they're also very passionate and honest bands, right? Because they really do write about what they care about. And stuff like that was a huge influence on me. And also my mother was an opera singer. And in theater, you really do have to bring, especially in these big dramas, you have to bring a lot of emotion to it. And so when I would hear her sing, I would hear no disaffection. I would just hear pure joy, pure fear, and stylized, but honest, from her core honest. And so those things made a huge impression on me. And I feel like a lot of the culture that I'm surrounded by, which has a huge amount of great qualities, but one of the things, at least my peers, I feel like often tend towards, is this sort of disaffected veneer, where you don't feel totally comfortable showing emotion. You don't feel comfortable expressing it. You don't feel comfortable as a male being soft. And that's never connected with me. It's like, I understand maybe why they do it, but to me, I just feel like life is so much easier. And the connections with other people so much more real if you just are who you are. And if you try to ditch a lot of that artifice and you be vulnerable. And that's how I would like to connect with people. So to me, it's very, very important to not try to put on a front of being too cool, of being disaffected, of not caring. And if people think that because I'm truthful, that is indulgent, I hope that over time, culture will shift so that's no longer the case. But for the time being, there's nothing I feel I can do about that other than just simply do what I believe is valid for my music and for who I am as a person.
And this is what's particularly interesting, is to sound melodramatic in an emotional sense, doing what you do. A big part of this is the contrast to the disaffected nature of a lot of the music that surrounds what you do. So,
True.
By comparison, so if we put you next to someone similar who has this disaffected call, then you're going to sound melodramatic.
Yeah.
If you were next to
Like
several other artists.
like Sigur Rós or Bon Iver or something like that.
Yeah, then suddenly it's not really even a talking point.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think certainly I used not to write electronic music, right? I mean, I came from a classical background. I studied composition and I wanted to be a composer. I was also a classical guitarist. And then later I played in punk bands and stuff like that. And so I feel like being emotional in those areas was a completely valid way to be. It was really the norm. I mean, if you listen to Beethoven or Brahms, these guys are not disaffected, right? Even Bach is not disaffected. I mean, for his time, I felt like he wore his heart on his sleeve. Why I chose electronic music, despite the fact that it's maybe not actually the most natural fit for my sensibilities, is probably that on a philosophical level, I definitely consider myself a technologist. I consider myself a futurist. And whether it's the boy in me or maybe whether it's just arrogance, I want to be on some sort of cutting edge. At least I want to be on the cutting edge of what I'm capable of, which is maybe not the cutting edge of what's out there, certainly not, but for me, this is my way of pushing my aesthetic. And just on a really simple level, I've just always loved electronic music. My babysitter's younger brother, who was a fair few years older, he was sort of a rivet head in Germany. And so when I was like 9 or 10 years old, he was already 13 or 14, and he was listening to Skinny Puppy, and he was listening to Fronter for Two, and he would make me a tape, and I didn't understand anything about it. But the tape stayed with me for years, and I came back to it, and it just left a huge mark on me. And I always thought that the possibilities are so limitless. And as a guitarist, personally, I've often been bored by the guitar. I was very excited to begin with, and after about 10 years, I started getting more into extended technique, bowing guitars, preparing guitars, detuning guitars. But that I ran out of ideas eventually. And I ran out of what I considered to be frontiers that I could push. And electronic music was just there and wide open. And so I just dived wholeheartedly in it. I love it. I'm very happy with it. My approach to live performance as a solo act really stems from having played in bands a lot of my life, and also just being sort of part of the theater world, the opera world. I once did a tour with my old band by myself, just based on loops and stuff like that, so all my bandmates couldn't make it, and so I was just like, okay, I'll just go on my own. And I remember at the time it felt to me one of the most truthful experiences. It was so terrifying, but since I had written a lot of the lyrics, or all the lyrics and all the songs, I felt, when I was alone on stage, very vulnerable, but I also it felt appropriate. I had written them alone at home, and here I was performing them alone. So that was a really cool experience, but I don't think it was a very engaging performance. And especially in electronic music, and sort of with me going to shows a lot, whether it's because of my label or because of booking or whatever it is, I see a lot of electronic acts. And one of the things I see a lot is really high technical proficiency. And I see a lot of tables, just big, wide tables. And if you make it nice, there's a cloth over it. And maybe there's someone doing projections, but it's basically someone who really could be fixing lunch from a visual perspective. Now, of course, I understand that some of them are far more sophisticated at what they actually do on stage than anything I do, but it doesn't read that way to me. And so when I built my live set, one of the things that influenced me the most, especially with keyboard playing, was I saw battles live. And what totally blew my mind was just the visual appearance of one of the guys playing keyboards to the side of him, and him being completely available to the audience. And I thought that was so cool. It was just the effect of that, with his keyboards out to the side and totally visible and moving, as opposed to someone barricaded behind gear or barricaded behind a table. And to me as an audience member, that made a huge difference. So the first thing with my performance was I wanted to figure out how could I create a corridor, and leave space between me and the audience, so that I could step forward and that I didn't feel screened off, but actually sort of organically part of the community, right, of the audience. So I started with that, and then I just wanted to do a cool light show, right? I wanted to do something interesting with lights, and part of my aesthetic is I have these usually old antique black and white photographs with these neon CMYK crosses over it. So the neon thing was already part of my aesthetic before I started planning out the live show. And so I didn't have much money, and so one of the things that I figured out early on is that I could create a lot of neon and a lot of lights and a lot of color just through blacklight. And so I just went onto Amazon and I researched paints, and I realized that was going to be a disaster. And by total coincidence, I saw that they had neon reactive gaff tape. And I was like, wow, cool. I can do my sins. And then I did my stands, and then I did my mic, and then I was like, well, I wonder if there's something, or if there are neon cables. And then I found neon UV cable sleeving, and then I got more black lights, and then I started programming them to flash. And then eventually I started performing with the mask for a variety of reasons. But basically the idea was just to create something visually on a shoestring budget, and to try as best as possible to perform as much as possible, to leave room for spontaneity, to leave room for error, and maybe also to not try to do too much. Because if you're a solo singer and you're so engaged with your feet and loops and playing this or that, you often feel that pressure, you have to do that. But what you're actually missing is getting sort of lost in the moment as a singer and as a performer. And I sort of made the choice early on, I was going to play below my abilities to allow myself to actually become a performer. And it's also made the live show so fun, because I really feel like I can get lost, and I hope that comes across. But those were some of the thoughts that I had in building the live set. I didn't know how much of my professional music life I bring into We Are Temporary. There's certainly some basic understanding of how to publicize one's work, the importance of engaging people online with content, creating a brand. I don't like the word, but I mean, why not? Why fight it, to create a brand that seems reflective of one's values, of the music, and to be consistent. So those are sort of things that I've seen work time and again in the professional world. And so I try to apply those lessons to what I do. That said, a lot of my professional life, I sort of keep out of We Are Temporary. I play a lot of shows maybe that I would recommend to other artists that I work with maybe not to play. I do a lot of things because I get joy out of it, that maybe there are better ways objectively to do them if you want success. For example, the new record I'm going to be releasing on a really limited edition sort of unique merch items. Maybe it would be smarter if I did a vinyl run that could be distributed with a proper distributor. Maybe it would be smarter if I took the money and spent it on advertising. But I don't want to. I want to do this because I think it'll be fun, and I think people will enjoy it. So I'm going to do that instead. So yeah, some practical lessons. I certainly am grateful for having learned and grateful for being able to apply to what I do. But a lot of it also I have to actively try to keep at bay. The cynicism, the constant ambition and success-driven nature of making decisions. I have to sometimes keep that away as a creative artist. Otherwise, I get overwhelmed by it and distracted from it. I mean, I settled on the name We Are Temporary, and immediately was thinking about what, and that to me that associates, it's associated with death, with, impermanence, things like that. And so I was trying to think of symbols that could represent that. And the image that kept coming back to was the image of the cross. But what bothered me about the cross is that I am very much an atheist, and perhaps on some level even an anti-theist, although I'm not the enemy of religious people, but I'm more adverse and skeptical of the actual institution. So anyhow, the pure cross was to me too religiously loaded. And I thought, well, would there be anything I could do to actually use the cross as a symbol of death? And maybe turn it into almost an atheistic symbol, or a symbol that sort of reflected my philosophy of sort of existentialism, materialism. And I thought, well, having the cross reversed is often used, but that too is a religious symbol because it's actually also, I believe, the symbol of the Pope, or something like that, St. Paul, or whatever it is. So I thought, well, okay, good, well, that too is religiously loaded. And then I thought of the side orientations, and I couldn't think of anything that they really signified. But one thing that hit me right away is, what did it signify if a symbol of belief is positioned in each and every direction? To me, that symbolized immediately equality of all beliefs, or perhaps the absurdity of all of them. The fact that any belief system is infinitely malleable and arbitrary, that the orientation is arbitrary as the beliefs are arbitrary. And so I settled on that. I wanted the 4 crosses in different orientations, and I thought that actually cut very much at the chase of my beliefs, as well as was a pretty interesting and I thought potent symbol of the fact that we are temporary. The CMYK, the neon, simply came into the picture because I thought of Tetris then. I thought of the crosses as Tetris, and I immediately liked that because to me it almost was a little, it highlighted the absurd nature of rigid beliefs. And I liked the fact that they were neon and sort of garish and almost like gamification of it. And so to me, the whole thing just rang really true for me. Certainly the idea that we are temporary, not just me, not just you, not just our species, but really truly all of it, all of existence. That is something that is really fundamental, I think, to the way I think about the world. And it's something that troubles me a great deal. I don't look forward to passing away. I wish I didn't have to. I think a lot of people feel that way. But that said, it does inform my life decisions. I really do believe wholeheartedly that this is all I have, this life. There's not going to be anything else. There's not going to be some sort of reincarnation into something else or a conscience that survives in some capacity. There's not really going to be an echo. I'm just going to cease, and it's just going to be this brief blip, and there's something terrifying about it, but there's also something about it that frees you up to simply do what you want to in life. Because everything else, your debts, your career, the way that people think about your life, they're all temporary. They'll all vanish, and you'll have nothing to show for it. No one's going to pat you on the back after you die for having done the right thing. All you have is the ability, while you're alive, to know life, to know that part of life which intrigues you, which excites you. So for me, that's music. It's basically always been music, and I don't know. It informs a lot of my philosophy. I mean, I'm very much a materialist. I'm very much a rationalist in that sense, or at least we consider myself a rationalist. And because I find it all kind of sad and absurd, and I don't understand it, and I don't know that there's a purpose to life, I suppose I'm also an existentialist. I named my project We're Temporary for a good reason, which is that I thought it was the most fundamentally important fact of life, is the fact that it was temporary. I suppose a lot of the way that I understood life when I was young, in terms of success or a life well lived, was through my mother. She raised me as a single mom, and she did a great job. But she was an opera singer, and she was a very successful opera singer. She toured all around the world, and she sang title roles of Electra and Salome, and you name it. And in order to do that, you have to dedicate your entire life to that. It's not that my mother doesn't have the capacity to develop other interests, but she almost had to choose not to. If she wanted to be truly great, not good, not very good, but really singularly great, she had to make the decision that this was going to be all she did, all the time. So that was the model that I grew up with. In life, but specifically also that was the model I grew up with as pertains to music. You wanted to be a musician, a great musician, that was what you had to do. I grew up in a small town, and I felt like talent carried me a long way. I felt like I was ahead of the game. And I went to college, and I got quite disillusioned with a lot of things, and I went through depression and had all sorts of problems, and eventually, for very complicated reasons, decided to switch into philosophy instead of music. So to give up classical composition. And that was something that weighed really, really heavily on me for years after. I felt that I had somehow given up, or that I wasn't good enough, that I had failed, that I had been given this opportunity, or this, I don't want to say talent, but desire. I had been given this gift of desire to be a musician, and I felt that I had somehow let myself down. So when I started my old band and I started getting into popular music more, I felt like I had a huge chip on my shoulder, and I felt like I was basically going to be able to blow other people away and just do all this great stuff, and people were going to appreciate it, and felt almost that I was entitled to it because I had put in all this work when I was younger. And that created so much pressure that I could hardly even write at all. I could take no joy in it. And the irony is that the more you feel that you have to do something great, the more tempting it is to not even try. Because if you don't quite try, you never really fail. But if you truly give everything you have and it still doesn't work, that is a terrifying prospect, and it's extremely hard to come back from that. If you give it your best and you're still rejected, that creates, that really is it's a very definitive and terrifying moment. So anyhow, that was the situation for many, many years. Thankfully, I feel like I've let a lot of that finally go. And I have started to focus in a little bit more on a total life. Not just the music life, but what makes me happy. Trying to build a family with my wife, trying to be part of her family, making lasting friendships, just playing tennis, having a puppy dog. All these things, they've just really settled me, and I feel happy with my life, and I feel happy with who I am. And I've realized that really fundamentally, the thing that I always got out of music was joy. It was that eureka moment when you were writing something, you got up the next morning, you listened to it, and you got goosebumps. That's incredible. I mean, that's an amazing feeling. When something you do gives you that feeling, you feel like this almost out-of-body experience, like you can't quite believe it. And that, to me, those are the moments I chase. Those are the moments I chase on stage. Those are the moments I chase when I'm at home at 2 a.m. writing music. And frankly, I just realized that between being loved by people around me and loving people back, I'm perfectly happy with that. And so if people are into my music, that would be really special to me. I would love to have the opportunities to travel, to play my music in front of more audiences. I wouldn't be indifferent to it. But life as it is right now, it's very good. And I just feel like it's taken a lot of pressure off. And I'm finally now being prolific again. I'm writing all the time because there's not so much at stake. I don't feel like I have to prove anything. I don't have to be the best. I just have to be happy with what I do. And I have to feel like it captures what I want to say. And frankly, it does. It really does give me the sense that I see myself in my music.